As we're settling in, I had said earlier that the comments that were made to Malky and made to so many other kids, you're dumb, you're stupid. It just it strikes to their soul and they never forget it. But it's also the positive things we do for kids that can make a genuine difference. I think we need to, if you're going to be dealing effectively with special needs kids, it's important that you recognize that it's the little things that make a difference. Some of you younger folks are just going into this field. If you're expecting to find, that you have Forrest Gump in your class, it's not going to happen. The victories for special needs kids are very small ones. And I'm reminded of one. There's something that's hung in my office now for 48 years. No matter what office I have, it's the first thing that I hang on the wall. And it's a reminder to me that when you're dealing with special needs kids, it's really about the small things, the little things that make a genuine difference. And I'll tell you the story about it. I had a little boy in my class named Jordy. He was 8 years old, had severe learning disabilities, language disabilities, so severe, in fact, that he was at a residential school where I was working my first year of teaching in the mountains of Massachusetts. It was before we even knew what dyslexia was. The term hadn't even been termed and coined yet. All we knew is we had a whole lot of bright kids who couldn't learn. And one of the kids in my class was a kid named Jordy, 8 years old. He was fighting the battle on several fronts, had learning problems, language problems, reading problems, math problems, orthopedic problems, social problems, behavioral problems. He really was fighting the battle on several fronts, but a great kid with a wonderful spirit. And the way I taught my class is he would come to my class every day, and I'd give him a notebook that he had, and he would write in a notebook something that happened to him that day. He would write down something that happened to him that day. And then he would give it to me. I'd take it home and read it, make a comment on it, bring it back to him. He'd write something that happened to him that day, and I'd follow the same process. So he was keeping a journal through the school year. And one day he came running into my class, or actually limping into my class. They had orthopedic problems. Came limping into my classroom. He said, Miss Lavoie, give me my notebook. Something great happened yesterday. Something great happened yesterday. And he came kind of limping into my classroom, and he said, Miss Lavoie, give me my notebook. I got to write something down. Something great. Something really great happened to me. I got to write it down. So I gave him the notebook, and he wrote something down. I didn't look at it, didn't see what it was. Threw it back in my briefcase. And that night, Abby, you doing the volume? That's better. That's better, yeah. Did you do anything? Oh, bless you. He's magic. So anyway, he comes limping in my class, and Miss Lavoie, give me my notebook. I got to write something down. Something wonderful happened yesterday. I want to write it down. So he wrote it down, gave me the notebook. I put it in my briefcase. Didn't read it till I got home that night. I read it that night. I cut it out. I framed it, and it's hung in every office I've ever had for the last 48 years. This is what Jordy wrote. Yesterday was a really great day. I almost caught a ball. The ball came into a recess. He didn't make a total fool of himself. He almost caught the ball, and that made his day. Yesterday was a really great day. I almost caught a ball. That's what special ed is all about, is the small things you can do for kids. The small things you can do for kids that make a tremendous difference. Remembering his dog's name. When he's been out sick a couple of days, he comes back in, you go up and ask him how he's feeling and really listen to what he says. To say I was sitting home with my family last night watching a movie, and something happened in the movie that reminded me of you. I was home in my house at 8 o'clock at night, and I was thinking of you. Those small, very special things we can do for kids that make such a difference. And if you do enough of those things to kids, it will overcome the sadness that many times they feel because of their failure in school. Again, kids go to school for a living. It's their job. That's what they do. We talked about universal design. If we're going to get along for the rest of the afternoon, I got to ask you to accept 3 or 4 things that we're going to talk about. There are 3 or 4 realities that I ask you to accept. First of all, most of the behavior problems you have with kids and major problems you have with kids are because of power struggles. You have power struggles with kids. And I hate to use the word blame, but I will use the word blame. I got it. Good, thanks. I will use the word blame, that it's our fault. It's the fault of us teachers. That's why we get involved with power struggles with kids. That's why we get involved with power struggles. The reality is that, you see, what we think is we think the kid is trying to take away some of our power. The reason we get involved with power struggles with kids is we think the kid is trying to take away some of our power. He doesn't want any of our power. He just wants some of his own. But we think he's trying to take away our power, so we get in power struggles with him. You see, here's what the deal is. We like to think that kids have a lot of power in our culture, and they really don't. Kids have very little power. If you think about it, they have very little power. They can't choose where they live. They can't choose who they live with. They can't choose where they go to school. They can't even choose their own names. Why do you think 10, 11-year-old kids start coming up with nicknames for each other? Because it's a way of getting some power. And when a kid gets to be 10, 11, 12 years old, he develops a real physiological need to have power. He's not a little baby anymore. He wants some power and control over his life. And he comes to school and we stand in the door and say, not going to get any power here. I'm not going to give you any power here. You see, the reason we get in power struggles with kids is we think the kid is trying to take away some of our power. He doesn't want any of yours. He just wants some of his own. So what we do is we picture power as being this big amorphic ball in the classroom of power, and we need every bit of it. We need every bit of power. So as soon as a kid takes some power, we think he's taking away, we think he's taking away some of our power, and we get involved in a power struggle with him. He doesn't want any of your power. He only wants some of his own. And so we're going to talk about ways you can give kids power without losing any power of your own. It's possible to give kids power without losing any power of your own. And an analogy I use is something from your ancient writings. Let's suppose that Abe has a candle that's not lit. And I have a candle that has a flame, and I touch my candle to his and take it away. Does Abe now have light? Does Abe have heat? Does Abe have flame? Of course he does. Did my candle go out? Is my candle diminished in any way? No, just like I can light his candle without my candle going out, you can give kids power without losing any power of your own. They don't want any of your power, they just want some of their own. One of the strategies we're going to talk about is a thing called minor choice technique. Look how simple this technique is. And you can use it at home and at school. Do you have any argumentative kids in the community? Any kids who argue? Well, in case any move here, you want to know how to deal with it. Let's say that this gentleman is my argumentative child. And I know that whatever I ask him to do, he's going to argue with me about it. He's good. That's how he gets power, is by arguing with me. But he doesn't want any of my power. He just wants some of his own. So I do something as simple as this. I want you to write a 100-word composition about winter. I want you to write a 100-word composition about winter. Do you want to use green paper or white paper? Green paper, fine. What do I care what color paper he uses? But by giving him that minor choice, it gives, in a sense, he's got some power. I want you to write a 100-word composition for me about winter. Do you want to write it here or at the library table? And just by giving the kid that minor choice, it gives, in a sense, he's got some power. That's all he wants. He doesn't want any of yours. He just wants some of his own. You know, you can do this at home. John, I want you to feed the dog right now. You want to give her wet dog food or dry dog food? Basically, what you're saying is, we're not going to talk about feeding the dog. That's going to happen. You can give her wet dog food. You don't care if it's wet or dry. The dog doesn't care if it's wet or dry, so leave that up to the kid. We've got to stop having power struggles with kids, and the reason we have power struggles with kids is they think they're trying to take away some of our power. They're not trying to take away some of our power. They just want a little bit of power of their own. The second thing you need to understand, if you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a child. So much of dealing with kids is just dignity. Back again to Korchak's work, that children are not the people of tomorrow, they're people today. They deserve to be treated with dignity. And I think many of the problems we have with kids is we just don't treat them with dignity. And my thing is, if you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a child. Now, when I was introduced at the beginning of the lecture, you were told to turn off your cell phones. Now, one of the reasons they ask you to do that is not only the obvious interruption, but also if the speaker's using a wireless microphone, it can interfere with the microphone. So they said, please turn off your cell phones. Suppose in the middle of my lecture This young lady sitting here, her cell phone started to ring. How likely would it be that I'd stop the lecture and say, well, I guess you're just a little more special than the rest of us, aren't you? We all turned off our cell phones, but I guess you don't need to follow the rules because it's basically your world and we're just walking through it. Could you imagine if I did that to her? She'd walk out. Anybody who knew her would walk out. And the folks from Mask would come up to me afterwards and say, Rick, what was that all about? You would never do that to an adult. You would never embarrass an adult in front of her peers. Then don't do it to kids. There's so many things we do to kids every day we would never do to each other. Imagine this, you're a married couple. You invite another couple over for dinner. They say they'll arrive at 8 o'clock. They arrive at 8:20. How likely would it be you'd answer the door like this? They ring the doorbell, you answer the door, you're standing like this. Excuse me, what time is it? Yeah, 8:20. You said you'd be here at 8 o'clock. Around this house, young lady, when we say 8 o'clock, we mean 8 o'clock, not 8:20. Now wipe your feet and come in the house. You would never greet a guest in your home that way. You would never greet a stranger that way. And yet how many times do we greet our own kids that way? They haven't seen you all day and they come home at the end of the day and they get a face full of mom and dad. If you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a child. I think many of the problems we have with kids today is we just don't treat them with dignity, the dignity that they deserve. And when you're dealing with troubled kids, and again, picture Malky in this picture, when you're dealing with troubled kids, and when a kid is failing in school, they become emotionally troubled. What we need to constantly remember is the pain that a troubled child causes is never greater than the pain that he feels. The reality is that when a kid is in pain, they are very, very difficult to deal with. But you need to keep in mind that the pain he's causing you is nothing compared to the pain he's feeling himself. You know, I had a friend, when a kid is in pain, they become desperate to control the pain. There was so much, again, in Malky's story that rings true in this, that her attempts to try to control the pain that she was in. Listen to this. A friend of mine runs a very unique family therapy program in Boston. And here's what he did. He bought an old 2-story home in downtown Boston. He turned the downstairs into offices where he and his colleagues meet with families. They do a lot of family therapy, and that's where they have their meetings. But upstairs, he maintained his bedrooms. And there are 5 bedrooms upstairs, single bedrooms. Now, if your family is being serviced by that organization, if on any given night one member of the family, whether it's mom or dad or one of the kids, just needs to get away from the family, they can go down there, go to the counseling center and sleep in one of the bedrooms upstairs. If you've ever been involved in a dysfunctional family, you know, every once in a while one member of the family would just say, I can't deal with this anymore, I got to get out of here. Now, previous to that, if it was mom or dad who felt that way, they'd go out and do drugs or get drunk. If it was one of the kids that felt that way, they'd run away. Now they've got an option. They can go to the counseling center, sign in. There's no alcohol allowed, no smoking allowed, no drugs allowed. They sign in, go upstairs and sleep upstairs, wake up, feel better in the morning, and the family knows that they're safe. It's a great pressure valve for those families. It's really, really working out well. And the family was being counseled. This family was being counseled, and there was a little girl in the family named Robin. She was 13 years old. And not only did they do counseling, but they also did yoga. It was very holistic. They did yoga stuff and all kinds of things, aerobic activities with the families. And the woman who taught aerobics went to my friend, who was the manager of the program, and she said, I got some bad news for you about Robin. And he said, what's that? He said, well, we were exercising today, and it really got working out, and it got hot. And she took her sweatshirt off, and she had like a halter top, and you could see she's been slashing herself with a razor, cutting herself with a razor, self-harm, and doing it where it doesn't show. So the director, oh boy, panic time, self-harm. They brought Robin in, and they said, Robin, we know that you like every once in a while to stay upstairs. Again, 13 years old. You come and stay upstairs in one of the bedrooms once in a while. She said, yeah, about once a month. I just can't stand it anymore. And I come down here and stay up there about once a month. And the director said, well, you can still do that. But from now on, when you sleep upstairs, you've got to have one of the counselors sleep in the room with you. And she said, whoa, wait a second. I've been doing this for couple of years now. I've been taking one night a month, sleeping upstairs. Well, all of a sudden, I have to have a counselor with me? Why? He said, well, we think it's best. She said, no, you owe me an explanation. What's going on? Why are you making this new requirement? And the director said, well, the aerobic instructor said yesterday she noticed that you've been cutting yourself with a razor, and we're worried about you. And she looked at him and she said, do you think I'm going to kill myself? He said, that's what we're worried about. She said, you people just don't get it. She said, my mother died a year ago. I was 12 years old. She died in my arms. The one woman who truly understands me died in my arms. Since she died, my father has started to drink. And he's lost his job. And is physically abusive, or verbally and sometimes physically abusive to me and my 4 younger brothers. He's given up all responsibility for the house. She said, I come to school every day. I'm 13 years old. I get up in the morning, I have to make breakfast for my brothers and get them off to school, then catch the school bus, go to school all day, then go home, have to clean the house, make the dinner for my brothers and my father, 13 years old, and then help them with the homework, put them in the bed, then do my homework, go to bed, and get up and start the same thing in the morning. She said, my boyfriend just broke up with me. And I offended one of the girls in the hallway the other day, and it turns out she's a member of a gang. And every time I get off the school bus at home, the gang's waiting for me, and they chase me home. And sometimes I get a beating, and sometimes I don't. And I'm flunking algebra. She said, I am in a world of pain. I've got all these people in my life causing me all this pain, and I can't control any of it. I can control this. When I press hard, it hurts a lot. When I press lightly, it doesn't hurt so much. I can start it and stop it. I can go 2 days without doing it. She said, it's the only pain in my life that I control. Just leave me alone. I'll be fine. Whoa. Can you imagine the pain that kid must be in, that she thinks this makes sense? That she's got all these people in her life causing her all this pain, and she's got no control over it, but she can control this. I can control this. Imagine how much pain that kid must be in. And that kid who's in your class, who's suffering that kind of pain, is probably going to make your life pretty difficult. And you need to always think that the pain she's causing me is nothing compared to the pain she feels herself. Because the most important thing to understand about people who hurt you is this. I used to say, these are the 4 most important words in special ed. Then I started saying, no, they're the 4 most important words in education. Now I say, there might be the 4 most important words in human relations. The 4 most important words in human relations. If you can accept these 4 words, and if the entire world would embrace this concept, I think the whole world would be a better place. You've got to understand this simple but profound concept. Hurt people hurt people. People who are hurt other people. One of the most unattractive aspects of the human condition is that when a person is in pain, they tend to reach out and hurt other people. Every time we have one of those horrible situations where somebody walks into a Walmart with an AK-47 and shoots 17 people he's never met before, and then the media starts looking at his life, you realize this guy is in tremendous pain himself. Now, I'm not excusing what he did. What I'm saying is hurt people hurt people. If you've got anybody in your life who's hurting you, whether it's a relative or a kid or a supervisor or a neighbor, if you've got anyone in your life who's hurting you, there's 2 ways you can deal with that. You can get all angry that he's hurting you and take revenge, or you can sit back and think for a minute. The reason he's hurting me is because he's in pain himself. Hurt people hurt people. The reason he's reaching out and hurting me is because he's in pain. Maybe the solution to this problem is to in some way reduce his pain so he won't feel the need to hurt me anymore. Maybe that's the solution. What can I do to eliminate some of his pain so he doesn't feel so badly, so he doesn't hurt so much, so he no longer feels the need to reach out and hurt me? Hurt people hurt people. If you're going to deal with troubled kids, you've got to understand that. If we're going to get along here, we've got to understand the difference between positive and negative feedback. This is not a behavior modification presentation. I don't believe in behavior mod. I think behavior modification had their 15 minutes in the 70s. You know, we didn't know a lot about how kids' brains work then, and I think it was a great solution to a problem we had. But we don't have that problem anymore, and I seldom recommend real classic behavior modification. except for kids at the very far end of the autism spectrum. But we do need to remember some of the things the behavior has taught us. And one is that there's two ways you can respond to a kid's behavior: positive feedback and negative feedback. Positive feedback is reward, recognition, praise. Negative feedback is punishment or taking something away. We all know that. What we forget many times is the kid's response to positive and negative feedback, and that is this: positive feedback changes behavior. Negative feedback only stops behavior. You will not change a kid's behavior by punishing him. You can punish a kid till the cows come home. You will not change his behavior. The only way to change the behavior is through positive feedback. Now, one of the reasons that when I was at Crown Heights a couple of years ago and we had that big kerfuffle about me speaking there with all the rabbis, part of the reasons was somebody said that they heard that I go around and say we shouldn't punish children. That's not what I'm saying. Come on, I raised three kids. I ran residential schools for 150 kids for 35 years. Of course, there's times you need to punish kids, but you need to do it with the understanding you're not changing anything. You will stop behavior by punishing kids. The only way to change the behavior is to catch them being good and reinforce that behavior. Let me give you an example. I'm sitting in my office. I look out over the playground. I see Tom picking on Jim. Tom always picks on Jim. So I stick my head out and say, Tom, get in here. I'm tired of seeing you pick on Jim. I want you to write 500,000 times I will not pick on Jim. Great thing we do in schools, right? Half the staff trying to get the kids to enjoy writing, the other half using writing as a punishment, you know. That doesn't confuse anybody. I remember a teacher bringing a kid in by the scruff of the neck into my office one day. She said, Rick, she said, I've kept Billy in for recess 15 days in a row, and he still isn't doing his math homework. Well, let's circle the slow learner in this picture, okay? It's not working. You've kept him in for recess 15 days in a row and it hadn't changed the behavior. Maybe you want to try something else, because that doesn't appear to be working. So I bring Tom into the office. I say, I want you to write 500 times I will not pick on Jim. You can't go to recess again until you're voting age. I'm going to call your parents, tell them what an awful kid you are, and I'm going to bring it to the principal. He's going to yell at you for a while. All negative feedback. Folks, I guarantee you, as a result of that negative feedback, I guarantee you that Tom will never, ever pick on Jim again outside my office. Heaven save Jim, any fellows on campus or before school or after school or a day that I'm not there. Because all negative feedback does is stops behavior. By punishing Tom for picking on Jim outside my office, Tom will no longer pick on Jim outside my office. He'll pick on other kids outside my office, and he'll pick on Jim other places. But he won't pick on Jim outside my office. That's all that I've accomplished. However, one day I'm sitting in my office, I look out over the playground, and I see Jim carrying the bases for the baseball coach, trying to be helpful, and he drops one of the bases. And he bends over trying to pick it up without dropping the others, and he's kind of struggling with it, and I see Tom, the bully, come over his way. And I think, great, Tom's going to kick the base out of his reach, make his life miserable. Instead, I'm delighted to see Tom bend over, pick up the base, and hand it very nicely back to Jim. I say, hey, Tom, come here for a second. I just saw what you did. That was a really nice thing you just did. You know, I called your mother last week when you were bullying kids. I'm going to give her a call today and tell her what I just saw. And I go walking down the hall with my arm around her shoulder, and I bump into the principal. I say, hey, Mike, let me tell you what I just saw Tom do. In fact, I could use some big guys like Tom to help me carry some books from the library. Come on, Tom, we'll talk about the ball game last night. All positive feedback. I will equally assure you that Tom is more likely to be nice to Jim whether or not next time he sees him, whether or not I'm around. Because positive feedback changes behavior. Negative feedback only stops behavior. Again, I'm not saying we should never punish kids. That's ludicrous. Of course, sometimes you will want to punish kids, but you got to do it with the understanding you're not changing the behavior. Don't punish the kid and say, why haven't you changed? He won't change. The only way to change the behavior is positive feedback and catching him being good and reinforcing that behavior. The other thing you need to understand if we're going to get along this afternoon is the concept, if you want to change a kid's behavior, you've got to buy into the concept of what's called, in psychology, successive approximations, or reward direction, not perfection. Reward direction, not perfection, okay? In other words, if you've got a terminal goal for a kid, if you've got a behavior goal you're trying to reach, you don't wait till he reaches that goal before you reinforce it. You reinforce each step toward the goal. The analogy I make is this. Kids' behavior changes in a similar way to the way a kid's language develops, okay? Here's the scene. You've got a baby, X number of months old. The baby's not talking yet. One day, the mother walks by the crib. The baby says, "Mama." Whoa! The mother takes out the video camera. Say it again. Say it again. You call your parents on Long Island. You say, "You got to come in." The baby's saying, "Mama." You got to hear the baby saying, "Mama." And life is good, and he gets all this reinforcements for saying, "Mama." 4 or 5 days later, the mother's walking by the crib. The baby says, "Mama." Nothing. "Mama." Nothing. "Mama." Nothing. No other looks. I've heard, "Mama, what have you done for me lately? I got to do some chores." So the baby looks at the teddy bear and says, "Watch this." Da-da. Whoa, the camera comes out again. The other relatives fly in from Cleveland. And, so what you realize is that the only way language develops is you have to reinforce each step of the language. You don't wait till the kid can recite the Pledge of Allegiance before you say your language is coming along quite nicely. You reinforce mommy and puppy and kitty and there's tons of research that shows if you don't reinforce the language, it stops developing. It's the same way with behavior. It's the same way with behavior. You've got to reinforce each step toward your target behavior. And here's the example I use. You've got an attention deficit disorder kid in your class. One of those ADHD kids, their lifestyle is ready, fire, aim. They always look before they leap, impulsive kids. And you've got one of those kids in your class. And he's very impulsive, and he's always blurting out the answer. So you sit down and you say, "Look, here's the deal, Michael. Here's what we're going to do. When I do a times table drill with the class, I say the times table, you need to raise your hand, wait till you're called on, and then give the answer. You got me? Raise your hand, wait till you're called on, then give the answer." Right now, as soon as I do, he's just blurting out the answer. That's not the way we do it. Raise your hand, wait till you're called on, then give the answer. You got it? Kid says, "I've got it." Next day in class, you say, "How much is 2 times 2? Michael goes, 4. Okay? I would submit to you that's a successive approximation. That behavior is less wrong than the previous behavior. At least he remembered to raise his hand. So instead of saying, "No, you're wrong," you say, "Mike, I can tell you're trying because you raised your hand. But remember, raise your hand, wait till you're called on, then give the answer." Okay. Next day in class, "How much is 3 times 3? Michael goes, 9. That's closer. That's closer. He raised his hand and called it out at the same time. So instead of saying you're wrong, you say, "Mike, that's better because you did raise your hand. But remember, you raise your hand, wait till you're called on, then give the answer." Okay, I got it. Next day in class, "How much is 4 times 4? Michael goes, 16. He couldn't wait any longer. He raised his hand, waited as long as he could, and then blurted it out. Yeah, but you'd say, "Mike, that was great. You raised your hand and waited." Remember, you raise your hand, wait till you're called on, then give the answer. That's the only way you're going to change behavior. You got to reinforce each step toward the target behavior. And teachers say, "I didn't have time to do that kind of thing. I'm so busy dealing with behavior." Well, that's like the farmer who says, "I don't have time to build a fence. I'm so busy chasing the cows all day." Well, if I built a fence, you wouldn't have to chase the cows. So you got to buy into those things, positive versus negative feedback, and the understanding of successive approximations. Let's talk a little bit again about why punishment isn't effective. And I will say one more time, I'm not saying to never punish kids. That will be ludicrous. What I'm saying is it generally doesn't work. And why would we keep doing things that don't work? So let's take a look at it. Top 10 reasons why punishment is generally ineffective. Number 1, they've been punished enough. Frankly, if you've got one of my kids, if you've got a special needs kid in your class in 4th grade, lady, you couldn't invent a punishment this kid hasn't seen. They've done everything to them, and it's not working. So punishment, they almost become immune to punishment. It just becomes ineffective because they become immune to it. Number 2, remember, as I said with the picking up the bases, punishment doesn't eliminate the behavior, it merely represses it. For punishing Tom for picking on Jim outside my office, Tom will no longer pick on Jim outside my office. He'll pick on other kids outside my office, and he'll pick on Jim other places, but he won't pick on Jim outside my office. So I haven't really eliminated the behavior. I've just sort of repressed it. Number 3, punishment doesn't model the desired behavior. Think about this. When I punished Tom for picking on Jim outside my office, what did I teach Tom? I taught him what I don't want him to do. I've given him no information about what I do want him to do. I basically, that lesson taught him, this is what I don't want you to do. Now, if you think about it, isn't that a stupid way to teach? Would anybody teach math that way? Class, today's lesson is 3 times 3 is not 12. Everyone together, 3 times 3 is not 12. That would be a stupid way to teach math, but it's also kind of a stupid way to discipline kids. You see, this is what bothers me. The kid can't read, we teach. The kid can't write, we teach. The kid can't spell, we teach. The kid can't do language, we teach. The kid can't behave, we punish. No, the kid can't behave, we teach. We teach behavior the same way we teach other things. But we don't punish a kid for not being able to do math, and yet we punish kids for having difficulty controlling their behavior. Punish doesn't model the desired behavior. It doesn't tell them what you want them to do. It only teaches them what you don't want them to do. Number 4, punishment models the aggression and the use and abuse of power. You know, I do a lot of work on bullying, and we've learned a lot about bullying. But I started studying bullying in the 70s, and some of the stuff I learned in the 70s is still true today. And one of the things we know about bullies is basically this: bully at home, victim at school. Bully at school, victim at home. When a kid is being bullied somewhere in his environment, he becomes a bully in another part of his environment, because hurt people hurt people. And kids with their sense of justice say, well, my brothers really, really bully me at home, so when I go to school, it's my chance to be the bully. It's my turn to be the bully. If a kid is bullied in one environment, he becomes a bully in another environment. That is true I deal with bully cases all the time. In 98% of the cases that I work with, that is true. So if you're a teacher who's constantly bullying kids by punishing them all the time, please don't be surprised when they become the schoolyard bullies at the school, bullying the younger kids, because you kind of taught them that. Because you see, punishment models the use and abuse of power. It basically says, I've got more power than you. I've got more influence than you. I can punish you whenever I want to. I was in a shopping mall one time, and I saw this young father, and he's walking down the aisle with these 2 little boys, like 7 and 5, and the 7-year-old is pushing the 5-year-old and hip-checking the 5-year-old, really giving the 5-year-old a hard time. Finally, the father got tired of it, and he turned to the 7-year-old and went, crack, and slapped him across the face, and he said, that'll teach you to hit your little brother. You bet it will, genius. That's the smartest thing you said all day. That will teach him to hit his little brother. I get frustrated with you, I hit you. You get frustrated with your brother, you hit your brother, and the cycle of violence continues. You're right, genius. That's the smartest thing you said all month. That will teach him to hit his little brother, because it reflects the use and abuse of power. Number 5, when a kid gets punished, it's so upsetting to get punished. To get that message and be punished in front of other kids is so upsetting that they often don't get the message anyway. So they don't even remember what they did wrong. So it's another reason it's not effective. Number 6, very important, if you're trying to establish a relationship with kids, the work done at Johns Hopkins Hospital indicates that kids associate punishment with the punisher, not with what they did wrong. So if you punish Billy at 9 o'clock in the morning at school, he's going to go home and say, my teacher punished me. What'd you do wrong? Well, I don't know, but my teacher punished me. They'll remember who punished them long after they've forgotten what they got punished for. If you look back on your life and you remember you're being punished, you probably remember who punished you, but you don't remember what it was for. Because the human mind associates the punishment with the person who did the punishing, not with the offending behavior. Number 7, punishment doesn't transfer or generalize to other settings. This is very important to understand. Let's suppose you're a mom, you got a 4-year-old daughter, you're doing chores in the kitchen, you're doing some work in the kitchen, and the daughter's playing in the driveway, and the daughter runs out into the street. You'll go grab her by the arm, you swat her in the bottom, you say, that's very bad to run out in the street. That's very dangerous and very bad. I want you to go to your room, and I don't want to see you till supper time. And you punish her for running out in the street at your house. Mom, I can almost guarantee you she will never run out in the street from your driveway again. But when the family goes to visit Grandma and she's playing in Grandma's driveway, she's very likely to run out in the street. because the research shows that punishment doesn't generalize. She didn't learn not to run out in the street. She learned not to run out in the street from your driveway. That's all she learned. So when you go to grandma's house, she's very likely to run out in the street. So, because you punished her for running. However, suppose the mom's doing the dishes, little 4-year-old is playing in the driveway, she's behaving herself, being a good girl. The mother sticks her head out once in a while and says, honey, being such a good girl, thanks for staying in the driveway. Makes my life so much easier. I can get all this work done. Maybe tonight you'll have an extra story before you go to bed. And gives positive feedback for staying in the driveway. She's more likely to stay in the driveway at your house and at grandma's house. Because positive feedback is an agent of change of behavior. Negative feedback only stops behavior. By punishing her run out in the street from your driveway, she won't run on the street from your driveway. For rewarding her for staying in the driveway, she's going to learn not to run out in the street and from anybody's driveway. Number 8, this is an interesting one. Punishment is only effective as long as the threat of punishment exists. I was trying to think how I'd explain this. My wife was with me and for this trip, and we're going to, tomorrow morning, we're going to take a train up to Providence and then pick up our car in Providence and drive to Cape Cod where we live. It takes about an hour and 30 minutes to get from Providence to our home on Cape Cod. About an hour and 30 minutes. I plan to do it in about 25, 26 minutes, okay? I don't see all 4 wheels touching the ground at the same time. I'm going to drive too fast. I'm not proud of that, but I'm going to drive too fast. And the reason I'm going to do that is our nephew is waiting for us at our home on Cape Cod. And he's been in the service. He's been deployed for now 13 months. We haven't seen him in 13 months. I adore this kid. I dedicated my book to him. He's one of my favorite people in the world. I haven't seen him in over a year, and I am dying to see that kid, and I'm going to drive too fast. Not proud of that. Well, I don't know if the applause is for the speeding or what, but anyway, I'm going to drive too fast. Now, suppose I come over the crest of a hill, and I look down, and look, and there's a Massachusetts state trooper parked by the side of the road. What am I going to do? Slow down. And the reason I slow down is I realize I have a moral imperative to follow I slow down because I don't want to get a ticket. And when I can't see him in the mirror anymore, I'm going to go back in the pedal, because punishment is only effective as long as the threat of punishment exists. The reality is that if you're sitting there with a teacher saying, this guy didn't know what he's talking about, I punish kids all the time and they behave for me. Yes, they will. But don't you dare leave the classroom. And you got to give your substitute teacher combat pay, because the only reason the kids are behaving is they don't want to get punished. When there's no threat of being punished, there is no reason to behave. As long as there's no trooper there, I'm going to drive too fast. As soon as I see when I slow down, because there suddenly is a threat of punishment. Number 9 reason it doesn't work. This is really sad. This is sad. Kids lose their ability. Kids lose their ability to control and monitor and evaluate their own behavior. I deal with a lot of kids who come from dysfunctional homes where there's a lot of violence, physical violence against the kids. And you know what happens? They lose their ability to evaluate their own behavior. The kid evaluates his behavior based on whether or not he got punished. So I'll say, were you good last weekend? No, I got punished 6 times. Or I'll say, were you good last weekend? Yeah, I didn't get punished once. Now, maybe the first weekend he really wasn't so bad, but his mom was in a bad mood, so she punished him unnecessarily. And maybe the second weekend he was hell on wheels, but the mom was too tired to deal with it, so she let it go. And yet he thinks the first weekend he was bad, and the second weekend he was good, but it was the other way around. Because the only way they can evaluate their behavior is whether or not they've been punished. And that's a tough place to be. And the 10th, kind of ironic reason punishment doesn't work, is punishment only works if there's a degree of motivation to please the punisher. This is very interesting. Suppose these 2 people are kids in my class. I really get along with her. I got a great relationship with her. Not such a good relationship with her. Okay? Punishing the kid I've got a good relationship with is actually more effective than punishing the one I have a bad relationship with. Because when I punish her, or I don't have a good relationship, she's going to say, well, he's punishing me because he doesn't like me. Or if I punish the kid I've got a good relationship with, she's going to say, wow, I better straighten up, because I know Mr. Lavoie likes to go to the media center, take me to the media center, and he said he can't take me today because I wasn't good. I better clean up my act. So ironically, punishment is more effective with kids that you get along with. What we need to do is overcome our knee-jerk response to punish kids. We've got to overcome our knee-jerk response to punish kids. There's a little book out it's neat to just have around the house. It's called Rules of Thumb. Rules of Thumb. And it's just a silly little book that gives rules of thumb from different professions. Rules of thumb that chefs use and that cooks use. That rule of thumb that a painter uses to determine how much paint he needs to paint a room. Just those little rules of thumb or formulas that we all have in different professions. I was reading one the other day, how alligator hunters can tell how big an alligator is. You know, the rule of thumb is the distance in inches between the alligator's eyes determines its length in feet. So if the eyes are 5 inches apart, it's about 5 feet long. Just a little rule of thumb, you know. That's in case you want to be an alligator hunter. But I read one. The one that fascinated me was race car drivers. You know how they train? This is going someplace. Don't worry about it. For race car drivers, do you know what they train race car drivers to do? When you're driving around the track and you see an accident in front of you, you know what you're trained to do? Drive directly toward the accident. Point your car directly toward the cars that are crashing. Now, if you think about it, it makes sense. Two cars collide. If you try to go around it, you're going to get hit by one of the bouncing cars. But if you point your car right for the point of impact, the chances are by the time you get there, the two cars will have bounced off each other and you got a free path right through. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my word, the amount of training it must be where every cell in your body, you know, is telling you that's danger, get away, to actually go toward it. How much training that must take. I think about this when you see professional boxers. If you've ever seen a fight someplace in Brooklyn, not that anybody would fight in Brooklyn, but if you ever happen to see two guys having a fight, what happens when one guy's getting beat? What does he do? Turns his back on his opponent, right? You'd rather get hit in the back of the head than hit in the face. And you see two guys fighting, and one guy who's losing turns his back to his opponent. You ever seen a professional boxer turn his back? That's how they're trained. They are constantly in their training. They've got somebody saying to them, don't turn your back, don't turn your back. So even though they're standing there almost unconscious, they've been so well trained, they just stand there, they don't turn around because they've been trained not to turn your back. I think about this when I think of 9/11. You know, the press tells us that 3,500 people lost their lives at the Trade Center. Well, 35 people didn't lose their lives. 3,000 people lost their lives. And 500 people gave their lives. First responders who went into that building. Of all the pictures we saw that terrible day, did you see any first responders running away from the building? It's all people running for their lives and the first responders going toward the danger. Now, how do they do that? Why do they do that? Because they're extraordinary people, but also because they're trained. They are so well trained that they can overcome that natural instinct to run away. Well, if we can train race car drivers to drive toward a crash, and if we can train boxers to face their opponent when they're half unconscious, then can't we train ourselves as teachers to not automatically think of punishing kids? One of my favorite stories about this happened at a Jewish day school in Los Angeles. And I was going to be lecturing there, and I was meeting with the rabbi, who was the principal of the school. And his office was on the second floor of the building, and you could look down into the courtyard of the school. And he was running late for the meeting, so I was just standing up there. It was a beautiful day with the windows open, and I'm looking down watching the kids play at recess in the courtyard. As I said, I just love watching kids play. And I'm watching all these kids play. It was an Orthodox Jewish day school. And I'm watching all these kids play, and suddenly 3 of the little boys wander away from the group. And I can see them because I'm up high. They don't know that I can see them. And they wander behind the art room. And they look up, and the art teacher had left the lid open on the dumpster. Well, an open dumpster for 3 9-year-old kids, this is like a miracle, you know, an open dumpster. So they jump up on the dumpster, they crawl up on the dumpster, and they're sitting on the edge of the dumpster with their feet dangling in the dumpster. And they think life cannot get better than this. How much fun is this for a 9-year-old boy to be looking into a dumpster? Suddenly, one of them looks in the dumpster and realized that the art teacher threw away a 4-foot square of styrofoam, about 2 inches thick. Whoa, that's much too good to stay in a dumpster. So one of them dives into the dumpster and takes the piece of styrofoam, hands it up to the other three. He scrambles back up. Now you can picture, I'm looking down, there is a four of them sitting on the edge of the dumpster, their feet dangling in the dumpster, and they got this big 4-foot square of styrofoam. Now, the further rules of boyhood indicate that needs to be broken into separate pieces. So they take the 4 pieces and they break it. So now each of them is sitting there, feet dangling in the dumpster, sitting on the edge of the dumpster, and they each have a 1-foot square of styrofoam. Well, the next rule of boyhood indicates those pieces that needs to be broken into smaller pieces and thrown back in the dumpster. So if you can picture the 4 little kids sitting there, feet dangling in the dumpster, they've each got a square of styrofoam. They're breaking off pieces and throwing them in the dumpster. One of them suddenly realizes if you rub 2 pieces of styrofoam together, it makes snow. Well, whoa. So picture the scene again. I'm looking down. Nobody else can see them. They're sitting in the edge of the dumpster. They're rubbing the styrofoam blocks together, getting covered with snow, howling, laughing, having the time of their lives. It doesn't get any better than that. Suddenly I look and I see this elderly rabbi in the courtyard sees what they're doing. And I'm talking elderly. This gentleman's probably 95 years old. And he starts walking toward the dumpster. Now, they don't see him coming. They're sitting there doing this stuff. They don't see him coming. And he gets up right behind them, and he just stands there. And he folds his arms, and he's rocking back and forth and looking up at him. They don't see him yet. He's rocking back and forth, and I'm looking down and watching this whole thing. Suddenly, one of the boys turns and goes, the rabbi. You know, just like, the rabbi, and the 4 of them, they looked like they were puppets. Their heads were on pivots. Suddenly, the four of them dropped their hands to their side and looked into the dumpster. And suddenly, like their heads were on pivots, all 4 heads went vroom and looked over at the rabbi. And I thought, what is he going to say? What is he going to say? What would you say? What would I say? You know what this wonderful wise man said? You know what this beautiful man said? He looked up at the boys and he said, how much longer will you gentlemen be? Isn't that perfect? How much longer will you gentlemen be? The perfect response. How many of us are, get out of there, get a brush your pants. Look what you do. They would be 9-year-old boys. They were doing exactly what I would have done at 9 years old, exactly what any one of these gentlemen would have done at 9 years old. They were just being little boys. And I loved his response. It showed so much respect for the dignity of their childhood. How much longer will you gentlemen be? A perfect response to that. On your way home tonight, think, how would you have responded to that? How would you have responded to it? Probably not that way. And that's what comes with wisdom. This guy had been around kids for a very, very long time, and he had such respect for the dignity of their childhood. Let's talk about things that we do to manage kids' behavior that don't work, but we continue to do them. Isolation and timeout. I hate timeout. Timeout was invented in the 1970s before we knew how kids' minds really work. Timeout is now a problem, a solution for which there is not a problem. I hate timeout. And I'll tell you why I hate timeout. First of all, I will guarantee you, if you use timeout at home or at school, I will guarantee you're doing it wrong. I'll guarantee you're doing it wrong. And I'm not according to what I think. Who cares what I think? I'm talking about the people who invented timeout. This is going to come as a surprise to you folks. Do you realize that timeout was never designed to be a punishment? Timeout was never designed to be a punishment. This is the definition of timeout by the guys who invented it. Timeout means taking a child who's receiving positive feedback for negative behavior and putting him in a position where he's not receiving feedback for that behavior. That's all it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a punishment. And yet we use it as a punishment. This is really a timeout. You got 5 kids, 5 9-year-olds sitting at a reading table. One of the kids is kicking the other kids under the table. The kids are laughing at that. They think that's funny. He's getting positive feedback, the laughter of other kids, for negative behavior, kicking under the table. So you say, John, I want you to go sit in the corner over there, kick all you want over there. That's a timeout. It's not supposed to be a punishment, and yet we use it as punishment. And then the things we do with timeout. I love this one. Go in the corner and come out when you think you're ready. Duh. The kid's out of control. What makes you think he's going to make a good decision about when he's ready to come back? You put him in timeout. You decide how long he's in timeout. And you know how, and in terms of the times of timeout, those of you who've been around as long as I have, when we first started studying timeout, what was the rule of thumb for timeout? How long should a timeout be? 1 year for every year the kid is old. Somebody did research and showed that an 8-year-old can stand 8 minutes of timeout. A 9-year-old can stand 9. So the formula is supposed to be how old is a kid? That's the number of minutes of timeout. There are schools all over the United States that are timing kids out now for hours at a time. We passed legislation in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I'm proud to say I testified in its behalf, and we passed legislation that said this to schools: if you time a kid out for more than an hour, it's not a timeout, it's an in-house suspension, and you need to report that to the state. And if you put a kid in timeout for more than 3 hours, you won't get reimbursed from the Commonwealth that day. Why should the Commonwealth of Massachusetts pay you for educating this special needs kid when you pulled him out of class at 8:30 and he sat outside the principal's office till lunchtime? You're not getting paid for educating that kid. You gave him no services. Timeout's supposed to be ba-ba-ba-bing. And you decide how long timeout should be. National Hockey League, the referee doesn't blow the whistle and say, okay, high sticking, go in the penalty box and come out when you think you're ready to behave. No, it's penalty box, 3-minute major, that's it. But the reason I really hate timeout is no matter how much you try to pretty it up and you try to make it sound like something it's not, no matter how much you try to make it sound pretty, this is what you're saying to another human being. I don't want you around. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. I don't want to smell you. I don't want to breathe the same air you're breathing. Get out. Do you realize actually what an awful thing that is to say to another human being? How long could you keep your relationship together if every time your husband or wife or your significant other made you angry, you'd say, go in the other room right now. Get in the other room right now. How long would that relationship last? If you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a kid. When you're putting a kid in timeout, you are really saying, I don't want you around. And that's a really awful thing to say to somebody. And you know what made me realize this? I was giving the lecture about if you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a kid. You know what I came to realize? I taught for about 10 years before I became an administrator, okay? I had really tough kids, real younger kids, but they were really difficult, very challenging kids. I used to time kids out 5 or 6 times a day. 5 or 6 times a day, I'd say, you, go sit in the corner. You, out in the hall. You, go see the principal. 5 or 6 times a day, I sent the message to kids, I don't want you around. Then I was an administrator for over 30 years. And you know what I realized? How many administrators here? Any school administrators? Back me up on this. You can't be a school administrator for 30 years without having had some real difficult meetings in your office. And I've had some very difficult meetings with colleagues or supervisors or parents. And you know what I realized? In 30 years, once, I said to another adult, get out of my office. You're not going to talk to me that way. Get out of my office. Once in 30 years. I said that same message to the kids 6 or 7 times a day. If you wouldn't do it to an adult, don't do it to a kid. There are strategies out there that work. Isolation at time isn't one of them. Forced apologies. We did some work in this at Johns Hopkins. It appears that if you force a kid to apologize, you know, you disrupted Miss Smith's class, I want you to go apologize. You got in a fight in the schoolyard, I want you to go tell Frank you're sorry. What happens is a kid develops the idea that he can do anything he wants as long as he apologizes for it afterwards. He can do anything he wants as long as he apologizes. And that's really no way to, that's no way to deal with kids. So forcing kids to apologize is, you know, they develop the idea they can do whatever they want as long as they apologize for it. Sarcasm. You need to be really careful. I'm a kind of a Boston wise guy. My sense of humor is very sarcastic. And I have to be very careful with kids because kids don't get it. Kids with language problems don't understand when you're being sarcastic. They don't understand when you're fooling. In my book, It's So Much Work to Be Your Friend, it's about social skills, and it talks about vocalics. It talks about, do you realize that about 95% of what we communicate with each other, we communicate in a way called paralinguistics. Paralinguistics is facial expression, tone of voice, body language, okay? Facial expression, tone of voice, and body language. About 95% of what we communicate that way. And if you don't believe me, everybody look up here for a second. What if at the end of this presentation I went like this? Boy, I had a great time with you guys today. Okay? I had a great time with you guys today. What did the word say? What did the word say? I had a great time with you. Was that the message? No. Leaned on the podium, crossed my feet at my ankles, put kind of a sardonic look on my face and said sarcastically, boy, I had a great time with you guys today. Even though the word said I had a great time with you, the message was totally different. Do you think our kids get that? Do you think they realize when you're being sarcastic or you're joking with them? No, they don't. They don't. And here's the thing. If they don't realize you are being sarcastic, what makes you think they realize when they are being sarcastic? So you say to the teacher, I want you to listen to me. Your teacher says to the kid, I want you to listen to me. Kid says, I'm listening to you. Don't you talk to me that way. Go see the principal. Goes down to the principal. Principal says, why are you down here? I don't know. I told her I was listening to her, so threw me out of class. But to the kid, that's what he said. He doesn't know the difference between I'm listening to you and I'm listening to you. And it's because of something called vocalics. And I suggest if you're working in special ed, you take it and you study this area. There's a lot of stuff on my website, ricklavoie.com, and there's a lot of stuff on my website about vocalics. And let me show you what it means. Suppose I'm talking to Abe, and I say this sentence to Abe. My son didn't break the window. I say all the words at the same volume. My son didn't break the window. Am I accusing anyone else of breaking it? Am I? Am I saying who I think broke it? No, I'm just saying my son didn't break the window. Now I'm going to say that same sentence 5 times, and every time I say it, I'm going to say one word louder than the others. And you're going to see it completely change in the meaning of that sentence. Suppose I were to say to Abe, my son didn't break the window. Whose son did? Abe's. You say the word my louder. My son didn't break the window, I'm accusing nobody. My son didn't break the window means Abe's son did. What if I said, my son didn't break the window? My daughter, who's not even in this sentence, okay? Or so I say my son didn't break the window means Adelby didn't break it. What if I said, my son didn't break the window? He cracked it, but he didn't break it. You know, or if I say, my son didn't break the window, he broke the door, not the window. By saying one word louder than the other, it completely changes the meaning of the sentence. Do you think our kids get that? Do you think kids with language disabilities get that? Of course not. So they don't understand. They don't understand. You need to be very, very careful about using that kind of thing with kids. How about cheap shots? I hate cheap shots with kids. I used to do a lecture called the 4 R's of education: reading, writing, arithmetic, and relationships. The most important thing you can do as a teacher is to establish a relationship. And the only way you can establish a relationship is to get the kid to trust you. And the best way to ruin trust with a kid is through cheap shots. Cheap shots. I'll tell you what a cheap shot is. I'm embarrassed to say I saw this at my own school. I was sitting in my office one day and looking down the hallway, and it was a Monday morning, and I saw Charlie walking down the hallway. Now, you know, as educators, we're not supposed to have favorites, but we do. You know, I mean, every once in a while, a kid will cross your path that changes you more than you change the kid. And one of those kids in my career was a kid named Charlie. He was the coolest little guy, about 8 or 9 years old at the time of this story. He was so funny. He was hyperkinetic. That was his diagnosis. He was hyperkinetic. He used to tell people he was hyperkinetic. You know, you can only have that in New England. But he was just this great little guy, and we used to call him the mayor because he used to walk. Those of you remember Ed Koch. He used to remind me of Ed Koch. He went, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, how are you?" You know, waving to the crowd. He was like a mayor in a parade when he walked down the hall. Hey, how are you? Like what you've done with the hair. And he was just crazy. He was nuts. A great, great kid, but a handful. I mean, he was just all over the place. Attention deficit and a real handful. In fact, every time I think of Charlie, I think of the best definition I've ever heard of learning disabilities. Do you know there are 35 accepted definitions of LD? The definition in New York is different from New Jersey's. New Jersey's is different from Connecticut. 35 accepted definitions. Best definition I've ever heard of these kids. Best definition I ever heard, and if you own one of these kids, you know what I'm talking about. Best definition I ever heard from these kids was not from something I read or something I wrote or something a course I took or a course I taught. It was from a dad, Charlie's dad. Frankly, an uneducated man, dropped out of school in the 8th grade, but a very, very wise man. And he was in my office one evening talking to me about his hyperactive attention deficit disorder son, Charlie. And in the course of conversation, he gave me the best definition I've ever heard of these kids. He said, you know, Rick, he said, Charlie's biggest problem is ulcers. And I said, ulcers? I didn't know Charlie had ulcers. He said, he doesn't, but he's a carrier. Think about that for a second. That's the kind of kid he was. He was just a real handful. And I see him walking down the hall this Monday morning, and he bumps into Janice. Now, Janice is his teacher, but she's also a real good friend of mine. And Janice had the flu, and so she was out of work for 4 or 5 days. So they hadn't seen each other in several days. So Charlie walks up to her, "Miss Dickens, welcome back. The old school wasn't the same without our Miss Dickens. We certainly miss you, and I certainly hope you're feeling better." He's one of those kind of kids. "And I certainly hope you're feeling better." And she said, "Yes, I am, Carrie. I am feeling better. And I miss you as well." He said, "Well, it's good to have you back. The planets are all in their orbits now. It's great to have you back." And she said, "Well, thank you, Charlie." And she said, "Charlie, I've got a question for you. Did you behave yourself for the substitute teacher while I was absent? Did you behave yourself?" And he said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "No, you didn't. You stuck the gerbil electric pencil sharpener and you hid the plan book." And she starts rattling off all the stuff he had done. And the way I was sitting, I could see Charlie's face. And the look in his face was, "You son of a gun. What a cheap shot. You set me up. You set me up. I used to trust you, lady. I don't think I'm going to trust you for a long time." She broke his trust. We do that as teachers. We do that as parents, don't we? You go out for an evening out, you come back in, you say to the babysitter, "How were the kids getting to bed tonight?" "Oh, they were tough getting to bed tonight. They were really tough. It was a tough night tonight." Kids get up in the morning at breakfast and say, "Was everyone good for the babysitter?" "Yes, we were, Mommy." "No, you weren't." Well, if you know they weren't, tell them you know they weren't. See, that was a cheap shot. And I knew Janice well enough to do this. And I brought her in and I said, "Janice," I said, "I got to tell you, I just heard your conversation with Charlie," and I wasn't wild about it. I said, "You know Charlie better than anybody. You are an expert on Charlie. Based on what you know about Charlie, for one moment, did you think your conversation was going to go like this? For one moment, did you think your conversation was going to go like this? That you were going to say, 'Well, Charlie, did you behave yourself with the substitute?' For one moment, did you think you were going to respond by saying, 'Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't. In fact, I was terrible. I was extraordinarily, I misbehaved several times.' Fortunately, I maintained a list of my various transgressions, and we can go over this, but I don't think I should be responsible for this paperwork." Of course not. He's not going to tell you if he doesn't think you know. See, that was a cheap shot. That was a cheap shot. Don't cheap shot, kids. If you know something, you got some information, present it to him. That's one of the things I learned from Korchak. Present it to him and let the kid defend what he did or what he didn't do. Minor choice technique we talked about. Collective punishments versus collective rewards. If you're a 4th grade teacher in your local community school, those, how many, 25, 30 kids sitting in front of you? Let me tell you something. Those kids are a family. They're a family. They've been together for 4 years before they met you, and they're going to be together for 4 years after you're gone. You're just visiting that family. And that family of kids has created a culture. And many times the culture has slings and arrows going at the special needs kid in class. They've already developed a culture of isolating or ignoring or deflecting from that kid with special needs. And that kid becomes the punching bag for the class and has been for the last 4 years. You can change that. You can change that. Wait for the opportunity. And the kids go out to recess and you come back in, say Michael is the kid, is what I call the class punching bag. He's the kid that everybody makes fun of because he struggles in school. And it's been going on for 4 years. You can turn that around. The kids come in from recess and you say, "Hey, tell me about Michael and his homework." "Oh, Michael never did his homework. It's been 4 years, man. He never did his homework." "Whoa, never say never. Michael, this is beautiful. You must have worked for 2 hours on this last night. This is great. You got all the information right. It's so neat. Look at the way you colored that thing. It's beautiful. Way to go, Michael. Way to go." As a matter of fact, I was so happy when I saw Michael's homework. I know you guys wanted to watch the rest of that film we started yesterday. I put it on during recess. We can finish watching the last 10 minutes of that film. In fact, Michael, you can run the projector. For the first time in that history of that family, they're being rewarded for what Michael's done right rather than punished for what Michael's done wrong. Because we as teachers use collective punishments. Here's what a collective punishment is. Well, we were going to go to the media center today, because I know you kids love it, but we went to the media center yesterday, and Peter knocked over one of the projectors because he was fooling around. So we're not going to go to the media center for a week. That's what I call teacher talk. What you're saying is, we're not going to the media center because Peter knocked over the projector. We're not going. That's what we're saying. But what the kids are hearing, the message the kids are hearing is this: Hey, kids, would you do me a favor? Would you take Peter out at recess and rub his face against the building for a while? Because there's some rule here in New York that says I can't do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to punish all of you for what he's done wrong, with the understanding that you'll take care of him for me, won't you? That's really the deal you're making. Collective punishment's very unethical, but you want to turn it around, try collective rewards. Millimeter at a time. I love the millimeter at a time thing because it shows that you can change a kid's behavior in very small ways. Very small ways. You can get a kid to behave the way you want him to by doing very small things. And the first one is millimeter concession. I used to use this all the time in my office. I'd be in my office, and a kid would come in all upset. Mr. Lavoie, they told me I can't play hockey today because, and he's really, really upset. He'd come in all upset, Mr. Lavoie, they're not letting me do this, and I want it to be fixed. And I'd say, okay, I want to talk to you, but you've got to sit down. But Mr. Lavoie, I'm really upset. I can tell you're upset. I really can. I want to do what I can to help you, but you've got to sit down. But Mr. Lavoie, Mike, when someone comes into my office, I like them to have a seat. Please have a seat, and then we'll talk. As soon as he sits down, everything changes because he's made that one little concession. He's made that one little step towards you. A kid would come in my office all upset. Mr. Lavoie, I want to talk to you. And I say, okay, I want to talk to you, but you got to take your ball cap off. You get your ball cap on. You got to take it off. But Mr. Lavoie, no, the inside is a no hat zone. You got to take your hat off. Take your hat off, and we'll talk. But Mr. Lavoie, Mike, take your hat off, and we'll talk. As soon as you take the hat off, everything changes. Because he's made that one little step toward you. He's made that one little concession. And it just changes the dynamic. In a very painless way, it changes the dynamic of the interview. Millimeter admission. Millimeter admission is when the kid gets in trouble but insists he did absolutely nothing wrong. I got in a fight with Peter in the schoolyard, but Mr. Lavoie, I didn't do anything wrong. I did nothing wrong. As long as he's making that argument he's done nothing wrong, you're not going to get anywhere with him. You're not going to get anywhere with him. What you got to do is get him to make one little admission. One little thing. I got in a fight in the schoolyard with Peter, but I didn't do anything. You didn't do anything, Mike? No, I really didn't. You didn't do anything, not even one little thing, Mike? No, I really didn't. Mike, not even one little thing? Well, I made fun of his shoes. Okay, now we can talk. Once he makes that little step, that little admission, he's no longer defending himself. I didn't do anything, and you can talk to him. And the last one is one I like because it's something the teacher does, and that is this, millimeter recognition. Here's how it goes. Johnny punches Billy in the schoolyard. Johnny comes in, you sit him down, you say, tell me what happened. He said, Johnny was picking on Jimmy, and Jimmy's my friend, and Johnny's much bigger than Jimmy. And he was picking on Jimmy and pushing Jimmy around, and he always pushes Jimmy around, so I punched him in the nose. Now he's expecting me to say, you're a terrible, horrible person. You're a terrible, awful, horrible person. But I dazzle him a little bit with my footwork by giving a little bit of what's called millimeter recognition. And this is how that goes. You're right. Johnny is much bigger than Jimmy. He shouldn't be pushing Jimmy around, and I'm going to deal with that. And you did the right thing by wanting to defend your friend. When I was a kid, my friends defended me, and I defended my friends. That was all good. But you can't punch kids in the schoolyard. In other words, what you're saying is, I say your emotions were fine. Your feelings were fine. He shouldn't have been picking on him. You wanted to step in. Your mistake was that you punched the other kid. What else could you have done? What other opportunities could you have had? What could you have done to change that situation? When I'm recognizing that you're okay the way that you felt. You're okay. You want to take action. Your problem was that you took the wrong action, and it changes the dynamics of that conversation completely. How many of you, when you're dealing with special needs kids, the kid will be chugging along, and every once in a while just have a bad day for no apparent reason, and then they get back on track again? Raise your hand if you've had that experience with kids. We all have. Say you've got a kid who has a bad day every 15 days, okay? Every 15 days, the kid comes into class all out of sorts and has a bad day. You got two choices. You can live with it and say, well, I'll just live with it. But if you do the math, that's about 20 days of school he's missing every year that he's not getting anything done. Or you can try to find out what's setting him off. Because generally, when he's a kid with a learning disability, if he's a kid with an emotional problem, all bets are off. Kids with emotional problems have a meltdown no matter what you do. But if it's truly a learning disabled kid, there's probably something that's setting him off. So what I recommend you do is what's called situational analysis. And it's very simple and extraordinarily effective, okay? Here's what you do. The first time the kid comes in and has a bad day, take a legal pad and write down everything that was happening that day. Just don't try to psych it out. Write down what you were studying, what you were talking about the day of the week, what time it was. Just write down everything you can think of that day that was going on. Don't try to figure out the causal factor. Just write down everything you think about and put it away. The next time he has a bad day, take out your legal pad and without looking at the first day, write the list again. Everything was going on that day. And the third time he has a bad day, do the same thing. Then and only then, you take the 3 lists and you lay them out in front of you. I swear, 9 times out of 10, you'll find out what was going on, what was setting him off. What was there in the environment that was setting him off that day? I'll give you a great example of one. I taught this in a graduate course one day. And the teacher came in, a teacher who was in my class came in a month or so later, and she said, you know, I did what you said you wanted me to do. I said, I got this kid in my second period English class, and every once in a while he comes into class off the wall, and it's very difficult. So I kept the chart, and I looked, and there's nothing the 3 days have in common. One day we were doing poetry. One day we were doing oral reading. We were doing different things. One day I wasn't there. The substitute teacher kept the list. So it's nothing that's got to do with me. There's just nothing these 3 days have in common. He has a lousy day, second period in English class about once a month. So I said, well, okay, doesn't always work. But you gave me the list, and I took it home, and I looked at it. And I went to class the next week. I said, you know, I did notice that each day he had a bad day, each day that Jim had a bad day, Tom was absent. Would that have anything to do with it? She said, no, they don't even sit together. I don't know if they're friends. They don't even sit together in class. That couldn't have anything to do with it. And she said, well, okay. I said, well, okay. So she looked into it. And you know what she realized? They didn't sit together. Tom and Jim didn't sit together in English class, second period. But first period, they were biology partners in their biology class with a very, very difficult biology teacher. Jim hated doing the dissections. So when they had to dissect the animals, Tom would do the dissection and Jim would keep the notes. On a day that Tom was absent, first period, Jim had to do the dissection. And so he would come in, nothing to do with English, it had to do with the class before. So the teacher went to the biology teacher and said, look, can you please, whenever Tom is absent, can you give him another lab partner? The biology teacher did that, and the problem went away. It's a great way to find out what's going on. There's generally something going on with the kid that you don't realize is happening. You don't realize it's having an impact. Praise kids. There's a whole movement in the field that says kids get praised too often, kids get praised too much. No, I don't think there's any such thing. I don't think you can praise kids too much. Somebody came up during the before the thing, one of the gentlemen came up and said, you've changed the way that I teach. I've been told that 5,000 times on the road. It means something every time. I mean, the person I don't know that I'll ever meet again says that I had an impact on the way that he teaches. I mean, that means something every time. I don't think you can praise too much. But the reason is that we keep praising the same way. I'm saying mix up the praise. Mix up the praise. Leave a kid a note. Kid's done a nice job, write a note to the kid. Stick it in his book so he finds it when he gets home. You know, I learned that from a teacher of one of my kids. Use your administrators. Say to the administrator, you know, Michael's been working really, really hard in his math class, and he's really doing well. If you bump into him in the hallway, say something to him, will you? So the principal's walking down the hallway, and he bumps into Michael. Hey, Michael, I hear you're doing great in math. Keep it up. Wow. The principal and my teacher were talking about me. There's 200 kids in the school, and the principal and the teacher were talking about me. Use the support staff. Kids, for whatever reason, love the janitors and the cafeteria people. They just love folks like that. And we had this guy who was such a grouch. I don't know why the kids loved him. He was this old grouch. His name was Tony, and he was a custodian, and the kids just adored him. And he was this grumpy old guy, but the kids thought he was great. And I used to use Tony all the time. I'd say, Tony, Mike put something in the science fair and got a prize for it. He was really nervous about it. Put something in the science fair. Say something to you. So Tony's pushing broom down the hallway, and Mike walks by. Hey, Mike, science fair, way to go, pal, way to go. Whoa. Tony, use that kind of stuff. Use the telephone. This happened very accidentally. My wife and I have always worked together. And when we were teaching, I had this kid in my class named John, and I didn't have a really great relationship with him. And Janet and I are sitting at the kitchen table doing our lessons for the next day. And I said, Janet, listen to this composition John wrote for me. And I read it to her, and she said, boy, that's terrific. I said, yeah, he hasn't done this kind of work for me in a long time. I got to make sure I say something to him tomorrow. So we got working, and she said, oh, you know what? I just thought of something. You're not going to see him tomorrow. You've got a speaking engagement tomorrow. You're not going to work. You're not going to school. I said, oh, well, I'll talk to him about it on a Friday. She said, no, he's going on that 4-day field trip with the science class. He's going to be leave on Thursday. You won't see him on Friday. You won't see him until next week. They don't come back until Tuesday. You won't see him until Tuesday. I said, well, gee, I don't want it to wait 5 days. I said, I'll call him at home. And I picked up the phone. I called the number, and he answered hello. And I said, hi, John, this is Mr. Lavoie. What did I do wrong? I said, no, quite the contrary. I said, I'm just sitting here reading this composition you wrote about your dog. It's great. In fact, it was so good, I just read it to Mrs. Lavoie. She thought it was great. It reminded me of my dog when I was a kid, and I'm not going to see you for a little while, so I just wanted to let you know that. Nice job. Thanks, Mr. Lavoie. And hung up. Totally changed our relationship. And I swear this is true. I was speaking in Akron, Ohio, probably 20 years later, and I look out, and in the middle of the thing, there he is. There's John. He had moved to Akron from Massachusetts, and he looked at me, and he gave me a big smile, and I gave him a big smile, and he came up to me, and he said, do you remember me? And I said, I sure do remember. We were into the conversation 3 minutes, and he said, remember the night you called me at home? Whoa. Now, I did it totally accidentally, but I've done it a lot of times since then. You've got to come up with creative ways to give praise. Indirect praise is kind of cool, where she does something good for me, and I praise her to the girl next to her. I say, look what Marilyn did for me. Isn't this great? Look what a nice job she did in it. And then hand it to Marilyn. Indirect praise. Self-praise. I have no problem with this. If we want kids to feel good about themselves, we should praise ourselves once in a while. I have no problem teaching a class, and at the end of the class saying, well, that went really well. That really went. I worked hard on that. That went well. In other words, it's saying to the kids, it's okay to feel good about yourself. It's okay to be happy with yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to evaluate you all the time. It's okay to feel good about yourself. Self-praise, interest versus praise, showing an interest in kids, and praising the act. Instead of praising the kid, praise what he did. Praise the act. They asked me to talk, this one. Earn a chance to take a chance. Like I said, I don't like behavior modification. Behavior modification says, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. If you get your homework done 2 weeks in a row, I'll take you for a hamburger, okay? That's behavior mod. You can break the back of behavior mod, and the kids really enjoy this, by doing a thing I call earn a chance to take a chance. And it goes like this. Instead of, if you do your homework 5 days in a row, we'll go to McDonald's. It's this. If you do your homework 5 days in a row, we'll go to the gym, and you can shoot 5 baskets. If you make 3 out of 5, we'll go to McDonald's. In other words, doing your homework doesn't get you a trip to McDonald's. Doing your homework gets you an opportunity to maybe go to McDonald's. And it breaks the back of, what'll I do if I get this? What'll I get if I do this? What'll I get if I do this? So you say, basically, that if you do you meet the contract, you do your homework 5 days in a row, we'll cut cards, and we'll go shoot 5 baskets, you get 3 out of 5, you're going to go to McDonald's. And it breaks the back of that, what do I get if I do this? What do I get if I do this? Another one I love is getting a commitment, particularly if you're dealing with boys, particularly if you're dealing with middle school. One of the things a kid begins to develop, according to Korchak's work, at about 10 years old, begins to develop a sense of honor. That if he says he's going to do something, he ought to do it. Use that with kids. Here's the situation. Suppose I got a kid in my school, Frank, And Frank, the principal, comes to me and says, Rick, you've got to know, as soon as the bell rings at the end of your class, Frank runs down the hallway knocking everybody over all the time. You've got to deal with that. Here's how I deal with it. Listen to what I do, and what I do is kind of subtle, so I got to listen for it. The end of the next class, all the kids start to leave. I stand in front of Frank, and I say, Frank, hold on for a second. Well, yeah, I got a question for you. He said, what's that, Mr. Lavoie? And I say this, just like this, not in a threatening way, just in a conversational way. I say, Frank, when you leave here, are you going to walk or are you going to run? Are you going to walk or are you going to run? What's he going to say? Yes, I'm going to walk, because that's what I want to hear. But the research they did into this indicates the chances are 80% he will walk because he said he would. The same research indicates the chances are only 40% he'll walk if you tell him to walk. So if you tell him to walk, chances are 40% he will. If you get him to say he's going to walk, chances are 80% he will walk. You've doubled the chances of getting him to walk by getting him to commit to the behavior. Because again, it's all about power. If you tell him to walk and he walks, who's got the power? Me. If he says he's going to walk and he walks, who's got the power? Him. It's all about that exchange of power. And suppose then he does run down the hallway. Now listen to what you can say. Instead of the thing he's heard a million times, which is, you didn't do what I told you to do, listen what you can say now. Gee, Mike, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. You told me you were going to walk. Gee, when a guy says he's going to do something, I really ought to do it. When I told you I'd bring in those pictures of the World Series, I brought them in because, gee, when one guy tells another guy he's going to do it, he really ought to do it. You hear how different that is? And you know, by virtue of the fact I gave this strategy, it means I like you. Because if I don't like an audience, I don't give that strategy. If I've got an audience who I don't think is on my wavelength and agrees with, I don't give that strategy. Because what I said at the end, that you didn't do what you said you were going to do, is as close as I ever come to expressing to a kid what I think is the most damaging and hurtful emotion that a human being can express to another. What do I think is the most damaging, hurtful emotion that a human being can express to another? It's not anger, it's not guilt, it's not even hate. Disappointment. I want everybody in this room to do something right now. Think about a person in your life who you really respect, someone you admire, someone you go to for advice and counsel, someone you trust, someone whose opinion you respect, someone who, if they tell you it's good, you know it's good. If they tell you it's bad, you know it's bad. It might be your mother, father, sister, brother, rabbi, whatever. Everybody thinking of that person who plays that role in your life? And I'll think of my wife who plays that role in my life. Would you rather have that person angry at you or disappointed in you? How many say angry? Oh, yeah, we've been together almost 50 years. There's plenty of times he's been angry at me. But disappointed, I can count on one hand, and I can tell you the dates. Because disappointment says, I expected this, and you gave me this. You let me down. I was counting on you, and you let me down. Oh, what a horrible thing to hear. Imagine that person I asked you to think about. Imagine that person calling you tonight and saying, I'm very disappointed in you. Oh, disappointment is the most powerful emotion we can use against each other. If at the end of this thing, the folks at Mask and Abe and Rivka, the people who sponsored this, come up to me afterwards and say, Rick, I'm kind of angry about some of the things you said. I'd say, well, let's go. Let's talk about it. But if they were to come up and say, Rick, I'm kind of disappointed in the job you did today, that'd blow me away. That would really bother me. I mean, I'd get over it, you know. Once the check cleared, I'd be fine. But but I mean, if they were to say I was disappointed in the job you did today, that would really, really bother me. Disappointment is too strong an emotion to use with kids. Every time I've ever read a diary, every time I've ever read a diary written by damaged kids, they talk about the disappointment that they see in the eyes of the adults in their lives. You know, I recommended very highly this book, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. But if there's another book you want to read the book by Stevens called Columbine. It's just called Columbine. Columbine. Yeah. No, it's Columbine, where the shooting was in Colorado. I will tell you right now, everything you think you know about Columbine is untrue. That mass shooting in Columbine that totally changed the face of American education. People talk about 9/11 changing this country. I think Columbine changed American education forever. 21 kids went to school in a suburban school district and didn't come home. It doesn't get any worse than that, okay? But everything you think you know about Columbine is untrue. And this guy who's won a Pulitzer Prize for the book lived with Harris and Klebold, the two shooters, lived with their families for a week, had access to diaries that they never ever, that no one else had ever seen, and he wrote really the definitive book about Columbine. And if I were to stop 20 people out in the avenue here and ask them 20 such questions about Columbine, they get every one of them wrong, because everything the press said is wrong. It's just wrong. I mean, I'm not a believer in fake news, but that was fake news. Because what really did happen was they came in, they created a narrative, and all they did was follow that narrative to the end. They talk about remember the trench coat mafia? There was no such thing as the trench coat mafia. That was at the school 5 years before. It had nothing to do with the shooting. They said that they went after minority kids. They went after African-American kids and Jewish kids. Klebold's best friend was Jewish. It had nothing to do with race. You know what wasn't even supposed to be a shooting? It was a bombing. They planted 13 propane tanks in that school to go off simultaneously. The only reason they brought guns was to shoot the firefighters when they showed up. That was part of their master plan. When the bombs didn't work, they started shooting people. But one of the things in those diaries, I swear the word disappointment occurs every other page. My parents are so disappointed. My teachers are so disappointed in me. My thing is, don't use the D word with kids. It's just too powerful. It's too strong. Don't use the D word with kids. Let's see what we've got. A couple of the things to do in terms of the universal design stuff. Okay, you want to. This is a great technique. Remember I told you there are techniques that are great for special needs kids, but particularly good, but work for all kids. This is one of them, agenda setting. Agenda setting. Basically, at the beginning of your class, set up an agenda. Tell the kids what you're going to do. Don't ask for permission. Just say, these are the 10 things we're going to do in class today. Write them on the board. You know what you're going to do. You got it in your lesson plan. Share it with the kids. Don't, again, treat kids the way we treat kids the way we treat adults. What if you signed up for a graduate course at one of the New York universities, and you went in the first night, and the professor said, the professor started lecturing, and you said, well, what's the name of the course? Ed 506. Well, what's the name of it? Don't matter. Well, what's the syllabus? What's expected? Don't worry about it. Well, what's the content? Don't worry about it. Just show up every Thursday. I'll lecture for 3 hours. How long would it take you to get your money back from the bursar? The reality is you're saying, if you're going to teach me something, I want to know what you're going to teach me today. I want to know what the agenda is today. But we never do that with kids. Put on the board. Set the agenda on the board. These are the 8 things we're going to do today. You know, it allows you to do, I think I got a slide for this. You say, okay, here's what we're going to do today in class. We're going to collect and correct the homework. We're going to discuss the essay contest. Well, I'm going to do a lecture on presidential succession. Then John's going to do his report on Franklin Roosevelt. Then we're going to do some map exercises, distribute and explain the homework, and then we'll finish that video that we watched, that we started on Pearl Harbor last month. Okay, let's get started. What you've done is you've set the agenda. This is what we're going to do today. But look what you've done. You've changed the dynamic of your class. It's no longer you against the kids. It's you and the kids working to finish the list. It's you working with the kids to finish the list. And you can create a sense of urgency. Come on, guys, we're only on number 4. We got 3 more to do. Come on, let's go. Let's get it in gear here. They forget it's your list. You can manipulate them this way. They manipulate us. You take the thing that they want to do, and where is it on the list? Dead last. Dead last. You know, you get grandma's rule. You eat the vegetables, you get dessert. If you do what I want to do, then we'll get a chance to do what you want to do. And look what it does for the kids with anxiety. So many, as a matter of fact, again, another case involving Malky, she had tremendous anxiety. I'm on the Learning Disability Association of America's Professional Advisory Board. You're only on the board for 3 years. You can't make a lot of changes. The change I want to make is this. I want the word anxiety added to the definition of learning disabilities. I think there are so many learning disabled kids who suffer from chronic anxiety. It ought to be part of the definition. And people talk about anxiety and depression as if they mean the same thing. Anxiety and depression are very, very different from each other. This is more than a little cute wordplay. Depressed people worry about the past. Anxious people worry about the future. If you know someone in a depression, they're focusing on something that happened in their past life, so it's something that they lost, something that happened in their past life. Depressed people worry about the past. Anxious people worry about the future. And many, many of our kids with LD suffer from tremendous anxiety disorders. For the kid with anxiety, look what it's done. He's worried he's going to have a quiz. It's not on the list. You're not going to have a quiz. It's not on the list. Or it is on the list, but at least you know you're going to have a quiz. And just by posting it, and the other thing you want to do is do what we call establishing. No, have we got one? Yeah, establishing an anticipatory set. What is an anticipatory set? There we go. Wait a minute. Doesn't matter. Okay. What is an anticipatory set? When you're doing a lesson with a kid or any kind of instruction, think of it as a trip down the river. Think of it as a trip down the river in a boat. You're going to take these 10 kids on a boat down the river. What's the first thing you want to do? Get the kids in the boat. Get the kids in the boat. You're not going to put 3 kids in the boat, then row back and get 2 more, then row back. No, you're going to put the kids in the boat. Think of that every time you teach a lesson, that your job is to get all the kids in the same boat before you begin the lesson. So you get all your kids come into class. She's all upset because her aunt is ill, and she's worried about her aunt. She's all excited because she got the lead role in the school play. She's all upset because she didn't get the lead role in the school play. She's upset that nobody's going to invite her to the dance. She's upset because her puppy is sick, and she called home and nobody answered the phone. She's afraid to. So they come in. They were all in different boats. They're all thinking of totally different things. Your job is to get them on the same boat. Because if you don't get them in the same boat, you spend all that time just doing what I call putting out forest fires. You're trying to get the work done. Look, puppies die. What can I tell you? I'll get you another puppy. Don't worry about it. Look, stop talking about the dance. My son will take you, okay? Lighten up about the dance. And you're putting out forest fires. If you get them all in the same boat, you don't have to do that. And it's as simple as this. Everybody comes into the class. They're all in different boats. And you just get up and you say, hey, what about that storm last night? Anybody get any lightning in your neighborhood? And just getting them all talking about one thing. Just getting them all focused on one thing. And as soon as they get focused on one thing, then they're all in the same boat, and then you make the journey. Establishing an anticipatory set, very important to do. We are running right up against time, but I do want to close with something. And there was a gentleman who came up and asked me for more information on universal design. Whoever that was, yeah, please come and see me. I got something I can give you for that. The time went by so quickly. It was just, there was still things. I've over-prepared for it here, but I always do. I'm going to remember today for a very long time. Being asked to be part of this celebration of Malky's life and using her life as a cautionary tale is a very meaningful thing, and I'm going to remember this and today for a long time. And let me close with something, if I can, for those of you who toil in the vineyards of special education, what it's all about. For years, I ran a school for about 150 very severely impaired kids. And I loved them. They were great kids, but very severely impaired. They were very complex kids. And I was doing an assembly one day, and I looked out at the kids, and I realized that for you in your life, your family will come together for you, just for you, probably a dozen times in your life. The day that you're born, the day you graduate from high school, the day you graduate from college, the day you get married, the day you have your first child, the day you have your second child, third child, and the day that you die. Your family will come together just to celebrate you a dozen or so times in your life. For those kids, 3 times. 3 times everyone will come together to celebrate them. The day they're born, the day they die, and the day they graduate from high school. Because for most of those kids, they're not going to get married. They're not going to go to college. So those things weren't in the cards for these kids. They were too severely impaired. And so that probably wasn't going to happen. So it got me thinking, we should take their graduation day, their high school graduation day, and we should make it like a carnival. It was a 3-day weekend. Kids came from all over the world, the residential school. My last year there, we graduated 25 kids. We had 800 people at graduation. We had this gigantic, it went on for 3 days, and we had the prom was that weekend, so parents could see the kids come into the prom. It was this great, amazing 3-day festivity. And of course, I was a director, so I had to go to every one of the events and be involved in every one of the events. It was crazy, crazy, crazy. And I used to literally have my suits and ties and shirts hung up together. I'd go home, take a shower, put on the suit, and go back out again. It was crazy and busy, but a wonderful, wonderful celebration. And one of those weekends finished, and I was literally crawling to my car, couldn't wait to get home. And one of the people, graduation had just broken up, and people were leaving, and one of the guests at the graduation came up to me and introduced himself. He said, "We don't know each other, Mr. Lavoie." He said, "I know you're probably exhausted and want to get home, but could I have a moment of your time?" And I said, "Certainly." He said, "My nephew goes to this school." He said, and when he was a little boy, he was such a happy little kid. He was such a happy, happy little kid. He was, the star of the family and the bright light in the family, and we all adored him. And then he went to school, and it all fell apart. He went to a place called school, and it all fell apart. And he became angry, and he became depressed, and it became difficult to deal with. And he went into his teenage years literally limping. So we sent him to your school, and now he's a happy kid again. I can't believe it. Now he's beautiful again. And I just want to thank you for that. And I thought, whoa, put that on the tombstone. That's, what a kind thing to say. So I got home, and I walked in the house, and as I said, it had been a crazy busy 3 days for both Janet and me. And I said, "You know what, Jan, I'm just going to go lay in the hammock outside. I need to decompress. I need a little rest." And she said, "Well, you haven't gone through the mail in a few days. Why don't you take the mail?" So I took the mail out, and I'm laying in the hammock and looking through the mail, and I got a package from a rabbi friend of mine from Los Angeles. And I opened it up, and it was a book of Jewish folk tales. And he knows I love Jewish folk tales. And I said, "This is perfect. I'm going to sit here and read these Jewish folk tales on the hammock." And I started reading, and I read this one, and the book fell out of my hand because it was exactly reminiscent of what had happened to me early in the day. And let me tell you the tale. It's an old Jewish folk tale about a king. I guess a lot of English folk tales are written about a king. And he was a king who controlled a kingdom, but it wasn't a very rich kingdom. He didn't have a big castle or a lot of jewels, but he was a wonderful, wonderful king. And the people in the towns in his kingdom loved him very much, as they loved his fathers and his grandfather. There was a beloved royal family, and they didn't have a lot of money and a lot of riches, but they were just really, really good people. And his favorite thing to do was to get on horseback with a few of his men and ride to the different towns in the kingdom. And as soon as he'd pull into the town, all the people would come from the stores and the homes to see the king. They loved the young king, and they'd form a circle around the king in the town square and greet him and talk to him. And he loved it. It was his favorite thing to do. And he would bring with him the only thing that had any value. The family had no gold or silver or riches. The only thing they had of any value was a stone that had been in the family for generations. And it was a round stone. The sides and the bottom were round and very rough stone, but the top was flat. And for generations, royal rock polishers had been polishing the flat surface of that stone so you could actually see yourself in it. That's how highly polished it was. And nobody had ever seen anything like that. And he'd carry it in a special leather pouch, and he'd pull into the town, and all the people would come, and he'd take the stone out, and he'd show it to everybody, and everyone would see this beautiful stone that could actually see your face in it. It had been shined for generations by these royal rock polishers. And he pulled into town one day, and he was showing the stone to everyone. And this little boy, about 7, said, "Your Highness, can I please hold the stone? Can I hold the stone?" And all the townspeople said, "No, don't let him hold it. He could drop it." And the king said, "No." He said, "I want him to know what it's like to hold something so beautiful." So he took the stone and he handed it to the boy. And as the boy took it, he was so nervous, he started to shake, and he's got the stone, and he dropped the stone. And when it fell, it flipped. So when it hit the ground, it hit on the shiny surface of the stone on this pile of rocks that were at the boy's feet. And the townsmen started to yell at the boy, and the king said, "No, it's fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Leave the boy alone." And he bent over and picked up the stone and turned it over, and his heart sunk. There was a big, jagged 8-inch crack right across the face of the stone. Right in the middle of the stone, this big, jagged 8-inch crack. The stone had never been damaged in 5 generations, and suddenly, under his watch, the stone is damaged like that. The townspeople start to yell at the little boy, and the king said, "No, it's going to be fine. I'll take it back to my village. The royal rock polishers will polish the crack away. Don't worry about it." But inside, he was heartbroken. So he went to his men. He said, forget the rest of the tour. Let's get back to the village. They arrived back at their own village. In the middle of the night, they wake up the royal rock polishers, and they said, get your finest cloths and your finest rubbing instruments and rub and rub and rub until the crack goes away. So they rubbed and worked on it for several days, and it just wouldn't go away. The crack was too deep. So they kept rubbing it, and it wouldn't go away. So they called for other royal rock polishers from other villages, and they came and they rubbed and rubbed, but the crack was too deep. It wouldn't go away. And the king fell into a depression. And he went into his home and didn't come out for days. And everybody was so worried about him. And then one day, one of the wisest men in the village said, I've heard about 3 very wise men, 3 very, very wise magical men who live far away. Maybe we should take the stone to them, and they could decide how to make the stone beautiful again. And so the king agreed, and they put the stone in the special pouch, and he took a few of his men, and he took a long, long journey across rivers and over mountains till he finally came to the home of the wise men. And he knocked on the door, and the 3 men answered the door, and he showed them the stone and explained what happened. He said, can you make it beautiful again? They said, well, we need to talk about it. So the 3 men went back into the house, and then they came out, and they said, we can make it beautiful again. We can make the stone more beautiful than it's ever been before. But you have to trust us. And the king said, I do trust you. And so they took the stone and they sat down, and the 3 men formed a group around the stone, and the king and his men are watching. And instead of polishing the stone, they picked up little rocks and began scratching the surface of the stone. And the king's men said, stop. And the king said, no, I trust these men. Let them do their work. Leave them alone to do their work. And they worked on it for several hours. And after several hours, they brought the stone back and they showed it to the king. And the king looked down on it, and what they did was, instead of trying to polish the crack away, instead of trying to rub and rub till the crack went away, they took stones, and at one end of the crack, they carved a beautiful rosebud. And along the side of the crack, they carved beautiful leaves. So what had once been an ugly crack in the stone was now the stem of a beautiful rose, and it was more beautiful than it had ever been before. And the king said, how can we repay you for what you've done? And they said, there's no need to repay us. We've only taken what was once so beautiful and made it beautiful again. That's your job as teachers with special needs kids. If you went into this thing thinking you're going to cure these kids, no, you can't cure these kids. This is literally womb to tomb. It is a neurologically based deficit, and the neurological system in the body is the only system in the body that cannot repair itself once it's damaged. It is literally womb to tomb. If you're born with a learning disability, you will die with a learning disability. You will never make it go away. Your job is not to make it go away. Your job is to make them beautiful again. I guarantee you that 13-year-old kid that you dread having in class that makes class so difficult for you, at one point in his life, he was 5 years old, who was desperate and wanted to go to school, couldn't wait to go to school. And he'd look out the window every day and wait for his brothers and his cousins to come home from school, and he couldn't wait for a chance to go to that place called school. And now he's a 14-year-old, and we failed him. And he's struggling in school, and he doesn't like school, and he doesn't respect school. And he's difficult to deal with. But I'll guarantee you, that 5-year-old kid is still in there someplace. That 5-year-old kid who wanted to go to school and be here is still in there someplace. It's your job to find that kid. It's your job to dig and find that kid. It is not your job to make the problem go away. Your job is to take that problem and make him beautiful again. And I hope today helped. Thank you. Thank you very much.